into the story, this is just a brief summary of what's gone on. King Ahasuerus, remember, he's the king of Persia, and he has given this man Haman. There's a Persian man named Haman, and King Ahasuerus has given Haman, who is Satan's agent, working on behalf of Satan. If you asked me at that day in human history, if you were to ask me, did Satan indwell anyone on earth at this time in this story, I would say I don't know for sure, but it could be Haman. So King Ahasuerus gives Haman, who is Satan's agent, authority to write a law that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all the Jews in the Persian Empire are to be killed, destroyed, and annihilated. We read those three things and we say, well, they mean the same thing. Yeah, but he repeated it 3 times to make sure all the Persians knew, I want them dead. Cousin Mordecai the Jew, I call him Cousin Mordecai because the story is about Esther, and this is Esther's cousin, Mordecai. 2 Jews are who we read about in the story by name. Cousin Mordecai the Jew urges Queen Esther, the Jewess, to go to the king and plead for mercy for her people, Israel. At this time, the only person that's known to be a Jew is Mordecai. Queen Esther is still an unknown Jew, unknown to the king, unknown to Haman, unknown to anyone that she is a Jew. Mordecai has shown that he is a Jew. King Ahasuerus allows Esther, remember, if anyone approached the king without being invited by the king, then there were only 2 choices. Either they were killed on the spot, or the king could hold out his scepter, which is what you saw in that first picture, and allow someone to approach him. And that's exactly what he did for his queen, for Esther. King Ahasuerus allows Esther to approach him and offers to do anything she requests. That's what we found out last time. And so what does she request? Queen Esther requests a banquet. Now this is we would call it a fancy sit-down meal. That's what she wants. She wants a banquet to be held for only 3 people. For her husband the king, for herself the queen, and for Satan's agent, Haman. No one else. And at this point in the story, as I said, the king and Haman do not know that Esther is a Jew. Only Mordecai in all the kingdom, only Mordecai, her cousin, knows that Esther is a Jew. But that's where we're at in the story. Let's pick up in chapter 5, verse 8. Esther says to the king, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and do what I request, this is my request then. May the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says. Now remember, there are 2 banquets, one on one day and then one on the very next day. Esther has asked for both of them. The first time she came to the king, she said, I want to call Haman in, I want to have a banquet. So they do that. And at the banquet, Haman or Esther says, I want to have another banquet tomorrow. I want the 3 of us to meet again tomorrow. And here we are in this in-between period. We're about to get into the in-between period where one banquet has already taken place. And now we have to go through the evening of that day, through the night of that day. We have to reach the morning of the next day. And then at some time during that day, around lunchtime, there will be a second banquet. So we're talking about a 12-hour stretch in time that we're about to read about now. God has 12 hours. Let me state it this way. On one day in human history, this day, right here, God had a 12-hour period in which to save the world. That's what we were down to. If God would not have stepped in this 12 hours and changed the king's mind, then on the 13th day of the 12th-month Adar, all of the Jews in the Persian Empire, which includes Israel, the land of Canaan, all of them would have been killed on that day. Yet we see God step in. In verse 9 it says, then Haman went out. Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. I mean, of all people in the kingdom, the queen asked for one person to sit at the table with her and her king, and that was Haman. So he left there glad and pleased of heart, wouldn't you be? But it says, when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate and saw that Mordecai did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. So Haman's hatred of Mordecai and the Jews was so intense that just seeing this man on this day made him forget all the joy that he had at the table with Queen Esther and King Ahasuerus. But in verse 10 it says Haman controlled himself. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't lash out at Mordecai. He controlled himself because he knew his plan was that in a couple of months, in a few months, all the Jews are going to be killed, Mordecai included. I'm going to wipe out all your people. So he controlled himself. It says Haman controlled himself, however. He went to his house and he sent for his friends and his wife Zedesh. Now listen to all the arrogance that pours out of Haman in this evening. This is the night that changed human history. So Haman has called his friends and his wife. Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches, the number of his sons, every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and the servants of the king. I mean, Haman just lets it all out, everything that is so wonderful about him to all his friends and his wife there. We see he's bragging about material wealth. He brags to them about the glory of his riches. Look what I have amassed. I mean, you could say a lot about this man, but there are different stories in the Bible that when I hear what Haman says, I'm thinking, oh, that's just like that rich man building a bigger barn. Here's Haman thinking, I have everything and tomorrow it's just going to get better because I'm the only person in all of Persia who the queen wants in her presence with the king. I'm the only one at the table. Today I was the only one at the table. Tomorrow I'm the only one at the table. There's no one like Haman, right? So he brags about his material wealth. He brags about the size of his family, that he has a large family of sons. What else does he brag about? That he's prized in the eyes of the king. That in all of Persia, again, there's no one to be so honored as me. It's just a dangerous position to be in. What does Jesus, I tell you, every time I say these things, different things pop up. What does Jesus say? I came to serve, not to be served. The attitude and the character of Haman is exactly the opposite, the attitude that God had when he walked the planet. So he brags about everything he has. What else does he brag about? I'm prized in the eyes of the king. Who's the ultimate king of the universe? God. I would say God the Father. The King of the universe. For all time, the King of the universe. Yes, Jesus, the King of the Jews, the King of kings and Lord of lords. But when you read in the Psalms that the Lord is the King of the universe, I think we're talking about the Father. And you say, prove it. In Daniel chapter 7, who was sitting on the throne? The Ancient of Days was sitting on his throne, because kings have thrones. And one like the Son of Man approached the Ancient of Days. The Father sits on a throne. Where's Jesus right now? He's at the right hand of the throne of God the Father. So I see this, that Haman, Satan's man, you can almost take the name Haman out and put the name Satan in. They're so close in character. I would say they're one and the same almost, but he's prized in the eyes of the king. And that simply just pops into my head. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So what was the mind of Christ Jesus? The one who was prized in the eyes of the King of the universe, the one who is the ultimate king. It says he was although being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation. Being found in appearance as man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death on the cross. So in this Haman, we see the absolute opposite character from Jesus Christ. Elevated, the last one, Haman brags to his friends and his family that he's elevated above all others in the kingdom of Persia. It's cooling off. It's only 79 now. He's elevated above everybody else in the kingdom. Again, the king and the queen sit down to a meal and there's only one person invited in. That's Haman. Boy, are things going to change in the morning. Arrogance, just pouring, oozing, I would say, oozing out arrogance from every pore in his body. Verse 12 says, Haman also said to his friends and his wife, look at what he says, even Esther the queen, if only he knew she was a Jew. Even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king. It's amazing the hand of God in this story. It's just amazing the hand of God in this story. Queen Esther invited only me to the banquet. If he only knew what God had in mind for this evening. Remember, the banquet would have been sometime during the day. Haman has gone home on the night between the two banquets, and he's gathered his friends and his wife, and he's bragging all evening to them about how great he is. Verse 13. Haman continues speaking on that evening. He says, yet in all of this, all the things he just bragged about, everything on the board there, all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai the Jew. Not just Mordecai. Mordecai the Jew. Can't stand Mordecai or his people. Every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, I'm not satisfied. I want them all dead. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, so listen to the counsel of the people gathered at his house. Have a gallows built. Remember the gallows in these days? The impaling sticks. Have a gallows built 50 cubits high. In the morning, before the banquet, listen to what they're telling him to do. Go to sleep tonight. First thing in the morning, have this gallows built. How long could that take? And before the banquet, kill Mordecai. He says, have a gallows built 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then afterwards go joyfully with the king to the banquet. If Mordecai the Jew is the reason that you can't have peace in this world, kill him in the morning and then go to the banquet in the afternoon and just have a grand old time and celebrate yourself before the queen and the king. The advice pleased Haman. Of course it did. So he had the gallows made. What's the end of the story? Who's going to hang on these gallows? Who's going to be impaled on the gallows? You can see the drama. The book of Esther is called one of the great short stories. It's probably the best from chapter 1 to chapter 10, the best like Shakespearean short story in the book. It's fascinating. It's got all the character qualities of a fantastic movie. Only it's real. So his family and friends tell him to kill Mordecai in the morning. Then enjoy the banquet after that. We move into Esther chapter 6. So now it seems that Esther's cousin Mordecai, not only are the Jews going to be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month, but now Mordecai has bought himself an early execution, and he's going to be killed in the morning. Esther's planned this meal, and God has to step in to save all mankind. Remember, when I say save all mankind, the reason I say it that way is because if Israel is stopped, if the Jews are killed, then the Jew Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, can't come to earth. If God doesn't step in the book of Mordecai, in the book of Esther, and do something, then Satan's going to have his way with man, and all is going to be lost. Look what it says in chapter 6. Tell me where God is in the story. He's everywhere. During that night, the king could not sleep. I find that fascinating because I can't sleep well either. But fascinating that in the nighttime, God would agitate him. However God did it, he agitated him enough to where he couldn't sleep peacefully that night. But during that night, the night between these two banquets, during the night the king could not sleep. So he gave an order to bring the book of records, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. I love this picture. The king sitting up in bed, obviously an artist's rendition. And he has some man come in there with the history books of the kingdom of Persia. Who wants to read history books? But that's what the king calls for. And of all the years of the Persian Empire, don't you find it at least a little bit coincidental that on this night when the king can't sleep and this guy's got all these records to choose from, he picks the one record book that has Mordecai's story in it? Who's in charge of all these things if not the God of heaven saving Israel? Look what it says in verse 2. It was found in this very script that this person brought into the king. It was the story of Mordecai saving the king's life. It was found written what Mordecai had reported concerning Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who were doorkeepers. You remember the story from earlier in the book, that they had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. They wanted to kill him. Mordecai found out about it. Mordecai told Esther, go tell the king, make sure he knows that I'm the one that saved his life. Go tell the king that these people want him dead. So the king finally rereads this, or has this story read to him. And this is what the king's response was. Remember earlier in the story, the king didn't do anything for Mordecai. It was an oversight. You say somehow it was missed by King Ahasuerus that this Jew saved his life and something should be done to honor him. Somehow it was missed on that day. And I say, of course it was, because it was for this night. It was a special event that was only to be put into the king's mind on this night. And God controls all those things. You think, is he really in control of all the tiny little details that we might call insignificant? And the answer to that is absolutely. He's in control of all of it. So the king says, what honor? I know now that this man Mordecai saved my life. I want to know what was done for him. What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? Then the king's servants who attended him said, nothing. Nothing's been done for him. And the king couldn't have that. So the king now remembers Mordecai as a personal hero. He's the man who saved my life, and he wants to do something for him. So he's asking, what has been done? Nothing's been done. Well, something's about to be done. I've got to do something for Mordecai. This was a horrible oversight. It must be fixed. So the king said, the king looking for advice, looking for something to do. And it's just so obvious to me, all the circumstances God brings around. Who's supposed to come to the king first thing in the morning? Who is expected? Who was told by his wife and his friends, go see the king first thing in the morning, ask the king to put Mordecai on the gallows so you can enjoy the banquet? Who comes to the king first thing in the morning? Haman. Coincidence? Of course not. The first person the king sees is Haman. God's crafting this event so perfectly, taking care of all the details here. So the king says, who is in the court? And now Haman had just entered, coincidentally, not true. Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace in order to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows which he had prepared for him. Haman comes here seeking blood, has no idea that the king couldn't sleep, has no idea that the king has Mordecai in his mind, has no idea of any of it. He shows up to kill Mordecai when the king's intention is to honor Mordecai. Who can do that? Only God. The king's servant said to him, Behold, Haman. The king wants to know who's around. Who can I talk to? Bring in one of my upper staff. So he says, Behold, Haman is standing in the court. The king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in. And the king said to him, now listen to the question. What's Haman's attitude right now? What was his attitude the evening before? I'm the grandest of everybody in Persia. Queen Esther only asks for me to come to her and the banquet with her husband, the king. I have sons galore and I have riches untold. So Haman's pride is full on. And so when the king asked this question, who's Haman thinking about except himself? The king asked Haman, what is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor? What's that man's name? Mordecai the Jew. Who does Haman think it is? Himself. Didn't ask any questions, just thought, oh, I have arrived. I'm eating with the queen and the king in a few minutes, just like I did yesterday, and now the king wants to honor me. What else could happen? It says, Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? Arrogance. Tripped all over his arrogance. Should have asked a couple of questions, don't you think? Verse 7 says, Then Haman said to the king. Now Haman gets to write his own story here, or so he thinks. Haman thinks that he is talking about himself when he thinks in his mind, how do I want to be honored today before all these little Persian peasants? Who do I want them to see me as? And so he builds this thing because it's the way he wants to be honored. So Haman said to the king, For the man whom the king desires to honor, let them bring a royal robe, which the king has worn. So he just doesn't want a royal robe. He wants the robe off the king's back. I want the finest robe. And not only that, but let them bring the horse on which the king has ridden and on whose head a royal crown has been placed. So he wants not any old stallion. He wants the finest in the land. If the king wants to honor a man, this is the way he should do it. He says, Let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man whom the king desires to honor, and let them lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him. So here you've got this man who's got the reins of the horse or the bridle, whatever. He's grabbed something that comes out of the horse, some piece of leather. I don't know what these things are called. He's dragging this horse. He's got this man in a royal robe, a king's robe on the horse. And while he's walking before the horse and the man, he is saying these things constantly over and over. This is what Haman wants to be said while he's on horseback. Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. Let it be known that the reason you're seeing me walk through the cities is because the king wants to honor me. Now we've seen over and over in this chapter, or in this book already, how easily this king is convinced of things. And so he has followed the advice of his attendants in everything they said so far. Get rid of Queen Vashti, pick another queen from all the virgins in Persia. He listens to what people tell him. So here we go. Haman has convinced, Haman has convinced the king of what should be done. He agrees with Haman. It says in verse 10, the king said to Haman, Take quickly then. Take quickly the robes and the horse. So The king wants to do this before the banquet. Do it right now. Do this quickly. I want this done immediately. This man saved my life and I want everybody to know it. So he says, take quickly the robes and the horse as you have said. As you have said. Imagine the horror in Haman's mind when the rest of the statement comes out. And do so for Mordecai the Jew. Who can turn a story on its, just flip that story in an instant like that, if not God? And what a sense of humor. I mean, it's not humorous, but it is. It's a humorous. I'll say more about that in just a second. To me, it's humorous that the nations and Satan rage against our God to stop him. And God flips things just like that so easily. And here he goes. Take quickly the robes, the horse, as you have said. Do so for Mordecai the Jew, who's sitting at the king's gate. Do not fall short of anything of all that you have said. Oh, I can't imagine. He was mad the night before just seeing Mordecai. And now he's got to do this. I can't imagine the rage inside of Haman. I can't imagine how mad he is. And as I just said, I find this unnecessarily hilarious. It's hilarious to me. It's unnecessary. It doesn't have to be this way. But I love when God defeats Satan with such simple, like that finger work of God stuff. It's just so simple to God to make the king not be able to sleep, to choose the exact. I mean, how did he guide that particular man to that one volume that he picked that had Mordecai's story in it? God just moves so easily through human history, and here he is writing a story against Satan and this man Haman, who wants to kill all the Jews. Unnecessarily funny. Why? Because of verses like this. Look what it says in the Bible. We've read this 1,000 times. In Genesis chapter 12, God made it very, very clear concerning His people, Israel, the Jews. I'll bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. Why do I say that it's unnecessary? Because of Haman. If he just took God, Yahweh, at His word, he would never try to kill all the Jews. This is totally an unnecessary defeat for Haman. This rage that he feels, this outrage at this thing that's being done, it's totally unnecessary. He chose it. He's cursing Yahweh's chosen people. Why do I think it's funny? Look at this verse. We've been here before too. I just talked about this verse a few minutes ago. Psalm 2 verse 1 through 3 says, why are the nations in an uproar like Haman is? Why are the nations in an uproar and the peoples devising a vain thing? What does vain mean? It means it's futile. It's not going to go anywhere. It's destined to fail. Why are you putting all your efforts in something that will never come to pass? And God says that's exactly what the nations are doing. And all the peoples, all the kings of the earth, they take their stand and the rulers take counsel together against God and against His anointed, as if they can beat God and beat His anointed, the Messiah. And so what's God's response to that? He laughs. We'll see it in just a minute. He laughs at that. Why would you choose that? I made it so clear to everyone that's ever lived, if you bless my chosen people, I'll bless you. And if you curse them, I'll curse you. What don't you understand about that? I just don't get it. Why the nations, why America continues to turn our back on Israel and on God and His plan when God tells us very clearly, I'll crush you for that. You can choose that if you want to. I promise you, I'll crush you for that. No one gets a pass. Not any nation, not any person. No king, no ruler, no one gets a pass. If you curse my people, I will crush you. And here Haman, Satan, trying this evil attempt to stop God and His plans. What do they say? Let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. I don't want to be chained by God. I don't want Him to be the ruler of the earth. We want to do it our way. And what's God's response? He who sits in the heavens laughs. It's unnecessarily humorous to God. Listen. I hear God, if I could speak in His words, and I can't, but if I could, I hear God saying, nations, you want it that way? You got it. If that's what you choose, I can play that way too. It doesn't change me. I'm still perfectly loving. I'm still perfectly holy. I'm still perfectly righteous, but I'm also perfectly just. And if I've made a law and you don't want to live by it and you want to face the consequences of the anger of the anointed one whom I will send, go ahead. It's your choice. So what does God do when people like Haman, fueled by Satan, no doubt led by Satan to destroy Israel, what does God do? He just come on. Get as close as you want to, and then just like a man would crush an ant, he just goes like that. And he's on about his business. And the Lord's plan rolls right on through human history. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the book of Esther. It's almost like he's holding a carrot up for Satan. Come on, little Satan, come on. Come on, little Satan, come on. And then he just reaches out and says, no, not today. I told you this was never going to work. I told you this wasn't going to happen. But Satan's so deceived, he tries over and over and over. He who sits in the heavens laughs, the Lord scoffs at them. Then He will speak to them in His anger and terrify them in His fury. And He'll say, but as for me, while you're trying to cast off my chosen leader, my chosen King of kings and Lord of lords, as for me and my plan, I've already installed my King upon Zion, my holy mountain. It's as good as done. Jesus Christ will sit as on the Jewish throne, the throne of David, eternally. It's already been set. It's set in stone. It's immutable. It will never change. So why do you keep trying to change it? Why do you nations and you kings and you rulers keep trying to bring around a world order that will never, ever be allowed? We're in the middle of it. It won't be allowed for long. Yes, we know that for a short 3.5 year period, the Antichrist will rule this earth. He'll rule all of it for 3.5 years. What? 3.5 years, that goes by in a blink. Talk about a twinkling of an eye. We've been on earth, even if human history is young, and I believe wholeheartedly that it is, we've been on earth for 6,000, 7,000 years now. 3.5 years, even by the short standard of human existence on earth, 3.5 years is nothing. And that's all the time that God is going to give Satan to have his Antichrist on earth before He installs His king on Mount Zion, the holy mountain. It's unnecessarily hilarious to me that Satan and men continue to try to beat God and defile God's perfect plan for humanity. It's never going to work. So what do we see at the end of the story? Mordecai the Jew. So verse 11 says, so Haman took the robe and the horse. I just don't even want to think about it because I don't want to make myself mad. But I can't imagine the rage that this man has. The trickery. How could I be tricked? It was me that the king wanted to honor. How has this turned out to be like this on this morning? What happened? Well, God happened, friend, and you said you decided to curse His people. That's what happened. So Haman took the robe and the horse. He arrayed Mordecai. So Haman actually is putting this clothing on Mordecai the Jew. Can you imagine how God rubs Satan and his people's face in the dirt? And he led him on horseback through the city square. Oh, so demeaning to this man Haman. And he proclaimed before him, "Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor." Again, we see God versus Satan here. God making a fool and a mockery of Satan and Satan's man Haman. A fool and a mockery. Because what does the psalm say? The Lord laughs. He scoffs at them. And he makes them a mockery. He sure does it on this day. Verse 12, then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home. Imagine the fear in Haman now, that he has said on the 13th day of the 12th month, all the Jews are going to be killed. And all of a sudden, Haman learns on this morning that the king loves this one man Jew, Mordecai, apparently more than he loves me. So Haman hurried home, and he was in mourning with his head covered. And Haman recounted to Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends, everything that had happened to him. And then his wise men, oh, now they're wise, his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, said to him, look how different it was. What did they tell him a few hours earlier? Build a gallows 50 feet tall, go into the king, ask him to kill Mordecai, be done with him, and enjoy your honor at the table of the king and queen. Not 10 hours have gone by, and everything is flipped on its head. They say to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish origin. Now remember, you're the one that wants to kill all the Jews, Haman. That was your idea. If Mordecai is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. So the day before they're eating everything that he's pouring out about how great and rich and all the rest he is, and now they're saying, buddy, you're done. It's over. You will fall to Mordecai. While they were still talking with him, the bad news, who wants to hear that from your wife and your friends? It's all over for you, buddy. You made a bad move. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hastily brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Now imagine that. After all that's gone on, now he still has to go to this banquet with the king and Queen Esther. I'm tempted, we're going to close here. I'm tempted to feel sorry for Haman. Just as a man who has feelings, a man who's compassionate, a man who has a heart, I'm tempted to feel sorry for what Haman must be feeling inside himself now, but don't. If you're like me, don't feel that empathy for this satanically led man, Haman. He's Satan's man on earth. He's doing the opposite of what God would have a man do. He's doing exactly what Satan would have him do. He's trying to kill the Jews and destroy Yahweh's character of being a promise keeper. What was the promise? I'll deliver all mankind through the seed of the woman. Satan's trying to destroy that. He's using Haman to do it. So biblically, and in the eyes of God, Haman deserves everything that he's feeling inside, every horror, every terror that fills him. It's what he chose. And as hard as that may be to hear, the Lord scoffs, the Lord laughs, and then in his anger and his fury, he speaks out. The king is coming from Israel. The king will be a Jew. The king will be seated in Jerusalem. And in his anger and fury, God calls out to Haman this day and lets it be known that Haman's the one that will die, not the Jew Mordecai. So don't feel sorry for Haman. God, in his perfect justice, must judge righteously. He must act. We'll close there and we'll pick up in Esther chapter 7 next time. We're past the halfway point, way past it now. More to come. Not Mordecai, more to come. Let's close in prayer. Father,